Good morning. My name is Taylor. I'm on staff here at StoneBridge. One of the things I do is I spend a lot of time looking at our finances, and we're going to spend some time talking about that today, everyone's favorite Sunday of the year. So one of the reasons that we do this is we want to set a tone of accountability and transparency in our finances, especially as a non-denominational church. This is something that we want to just invite our congregation to be a part of. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to look at our income and expenses for the last year and since moving off the square, and then take a look at our cash, investments, and what that means for our loan. So we're just going to go ahead and jump straight in. Since moving off the square, we have seen an increase in our income year after year, and so we're so grateful to y'all for that. This year we continued in a similar trend. We're up 1% from last year in 2024, but what I want to spend some time focusing on is the light green portion at the top. And so you'll see that we grew in specific gifts. What specific gifts are is when y'all write Christmas Eve on your check when it comes through our doors, or you select Act 6 or another ministry when you're giving on the Church Center app, you're giving to specific ministries within StoneBridge, and that is something we are so grateful for. And so that number and your specific generosity grew by 25% this year, and so that's something to celebrate from y'all in the congregation and giving more specifically and more generously. So thank you guys so much for that. We'll go ahead and move on to our expenses. And so, again, since moving off the square, we have slowly grown our expenses year after year. When we first moved, we were very slow to make some changes in some of how we did things, wondering, was the growth here going to stay or was it temporary? And as we've seen that this church is only growing, 2 years ago, the admin team identified a need to start changing some things. And so we have grown our staff over the past 2 years. We've upped our programming, which I hope that y'all have experienced, our new events for the kids team, new events for the youth, adults, worship nights that existed in 2024 that didn't exist in 23. And so with that, we are seeing a slight increase in our expenses. And so just looking at this, our operating expenses is going to be everything from staff, benefits and salaries to our mortgage, utilities, and everything. And then going up from there, we also have our ministries, which is what we talked about, some of our programming that the hope is that y'all are experiencing as members of the body. And then our giving, I don't know if y'all know this, I hope you know this, is that we give away 12% of everything that comes through our doors. So while y'all are giving out of your income so generously, we are giving out of ours as well. And so as our income grows, that giving portion is growing. And we've also been able to spend some money out of our savings last year. And so we'll talk about what that looks like and why on the next slide. So actually, I should have touched on something. Last year and every year since moving off the square, we have brought in more money than we have spent. And so this past year, we came in $370,000 under budget, or at least with a surplus of $370,000. A big portion of that is due to our ministry leaders being so intentional with their spending for their teams and everything. So a big thank you to our ministry leaders for being intentional in that way. So when we have a surplus of our funds, we are able to add that surplus to our cash on hand. And so that's what we're looking at here, is our cash reserves. And we don't want to build wealth for the sake of building wealth, but we do want to be intentional, to take the money that God has given us today and earmark it for the possibility of him using tomorrow. And so when we set aside money, that's, you'll see the difference between 21 and 22, is we've set aside what we call designated funds. In 2024, that was $1.7 million of cash that we have, and it's earmarked with specific purposes, specifically being wise, being generous, and investing in others. The areas that those fall under is we have a 90-day reserve, which makes sure that this church is able to make ends meet for our staff, for our mortgage payments, and our utilities in the event that something crazy happens for 3 months. We also have set aside money for building repairs. This building is not cheap. And when we moved off the square, those expenses grew because we went from renting to owning. So last year, what you saw on the other slide, money we spent out of our savings, was to update our HVAC. And so because we've set aside this money ahead of time, that is not coming out of our operating expenses. And so other things, when we look at that's being wise, what does it look like to be generous? We are able to support our long-term missionaries out of that fund. We are able to support our school systems and ministries like Act 6 out of those funds. And then when we look at investing in others, we've gotten to see the fruit of that here as a church, specifically having Russell as our resident pastor for 24, now again for 25, having Jordan and Megan over the past few years serve as worship residents. All of that is what it looks like to invest in others. And so that's going to be our cash reserves. And now we'll go into looking at that same $2.3 million in cash a different way on the next slide. So here's a total distribution of our assets. When we moved off the square, we decided to no longer pay rent and buy the building. So that's at $6.2 million up there. That is the building, the land under, and any capital improvements that we have made to the building. Those top two numbers in the light greens is the same $2.3 million we looked at on the last slide. What this slide is ultimately showing is going to be that 50% of that $2.3 million is is in our checking and savings. The other half is in CDs and money market accounts. The primary driver for us investing in those CDs is because the interest rate we're earning on CDs is higher than the interest rate we're paying on our loan. And so 100% of the interest earned on those CDs goes towards additional mortgage payments on our loan. And so last year, our CDs alone lent to $40,000 of additional principal-only payments on our loan. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. We'll just do, last thing, a small recap on our loan. So when we moved over here in 2020, we took out a $2.6 million loan at a 3-point-something interest rate. And since then, we've paid $1.1 million towards that loan, and that is really awesome. One of our goals with that is to bring our loan down to a certain point that when we have to refinance in 2026, that our mortgage payment will likely stay the same, even with an increased interest rate. So this past year in 24, we were able to pay $100,000 in additional principal-only payments, $40,000 of which came just from our CD interest. So we are in a very good position going into 26. One of the benchmarks that we had to keep in trend with that was making sure that we hit below $2 million on our loan by the end of 24, and we did that. Thank you very much to the admin team and y'all's total generosity for being able to make that happen. So finally, we just want to say that in 26, we will have to make a decision on what we want to do with this building. We will either refinance, pay off the loan, or we're going to do building expansion. That's going to be a decision point for us. Our goal as church leadership and the admin team is to have a decision for that by fall of this year so that we can financially prepare to be in a position to act on that in the fall of 26. So if y'all can be praying for that, for wisdom and discernment, for church leadership to know the direction that God is calling us, specifically through our financial stewardship. That's pretty much it. And so David's going to come up and say just a few other words, but thank y'all so much for just your generosity over the years and for staying awake.
Good. As Taylor said, a couple of things I want to reiterate. One, why some of you don't care about any of that. And some of that I think is good because you trust. And some of it you might want to care a little bit because it's your money. The reason that we do this, again, it's all transparency and accountability. We have an open book policy. If you would like a deeper dive, you can reach out to Taylor. She's our director of operations. The admin team there is behind me. On the screen, I would say the three guys were on the team in 24, and so they were probably the best ones to talk to about last year. Sandy and Ann and Jennifer just rotated on in January, so they might not have quite as much familiarity with what we were doing last year. So you can reach out to any of those folks, and they would be more than happy to answer your questions. For me, I would just say, again, thank y'all for your continued generosity. We've always had more than what we've needed for the last 17 years, and that continues to be the case, and that's because y'all give, and we're thankful that you do that. We don't talk about money a ton, but it is something that's important, and we are glad, again, that you trust us enough to give on a regular basis. I would say for me that kind of another headline for 2025, this practice around generosity. We're not necessarily trying to generate more money for StoneBridge. It's actually not what we're doing at all. I think there is a recognition where we live that time and money are precious commodities, and they're areas that we can tend to exercise control. And so by supporting our long-term missionary partners, our long-term ministry partners, we're hoping to just crack the door a little bit wider. So we're not saying we're not being generous. Many of you are. We're just saying let's give God a little bit more space in our hearts, and one of the ways to do that is through giving. I read a couple of updates from some of our long-term partners this week, and they were talking about the number of people who have added on to their list. So thank y'all for doing that, and I would encourage you, please do. If StoneBridge is your home church and you haven't yet picked one of these families to support, please do that through the end of the year. I do think it's going to make a difference in our lives and in their lives. Kind of the picture for me, you may think, what does it matter? It's $25. What does it matter? It's 2 minutes of prayer. It's 3 minutes of reading. Like, how does any of that actually make a difference? This is just my perspective. We saw last week in our passage, Jesus rewards us based on what we do. So this is not about our salvation's 100% grace. It's given to us. We freely receive it. And then we want to walk in obedience to the Lord. And so we're standing with Jesus in heaven, and he's saying, "Here, let me show you what your obedience did. Let me show you the fruit. All those things you didn't see. You didn't know what your dollars did. I want to show you. You didn't know what your prayers did. I want to show you. You didn't know what those small acts of obedience, reaching out to somebody who was on your mind, taking a minute to spend with somebody when you were busy. Let me show you the impact of all of that." And we won't see that until the other side of death. And I do think we'll see it then. And I think the reward at that point, I don't know what all it is, at least one expression is, "Well done, my good and faithful son or daughter." And that will be coming from him. That will be more soul-filling than any vacation or house or car or experience or whatever it is that we gave up. And every dollar you give, it's a sacrifice. It's a dollar you didn't spend on something else. Every minute you spend in prayer is a minute you didn't spend on something else. It's all sacrifice. And when we are with him, it will be so much more than worth it. And so I want to thank you for your continued generosity and sacrifice in so many areas. And my prayer, you can go ahead and stand up. God, my prayer for everybody in this room, the kids, the students, and the adults, is that every one of us at the end would hear you saying that. "Well done. You did great. You did great. I'm so proud of you for your faithful obedience over time. Well done." And God, I pray with hearts that are full of gratitude, you are more generous than we'll ever be. I pray with hearts that are full of thanksgiving and gratitude, we would enter into this time of worship. So would you lead us, Holy Spirit, in Jesus' name.